Joe was one of the people I interviewed for my longevity summit, and his work is great. And it's very important for a particular reason. We know the power of our minds. Yes. But what's beautiful about Joe's work is that he has the research to back it up. And that's so important. It's like you can talk all you want about theory and what should be, but when he comes up with the data that actually shows the change based on mindset, based on meditation, based on relaxation.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Wellness at the Speed of Light show. I'm your host, Dr. Stefano Sinicropi. So excited today to have Dr. Stephen Sideroff on the program, who has a groundbreaking book, The 9 Pillars of Resilience, which he was nice enough to provide me with an advance copy. As a surgeon myself, I was just telling him how much of a great book it is for people like myself that are going 100 miles an hour, that really have to figure out ways to navigate the world. But we all struggle in life and need resilience. So I think that this book could not be coming at a more opportune time. Now, just a little bit about Dr. Sideroff. He's an internationally recognized psychologist. He's currently out at UCLA. He's well published, very well known in those circles, and very excited to be talking about his new book today on resilience. A lot of that book I'm going to put in these principles to effect in my own life. So thank you for that. So on that note, welcome to the show today. And could you tell us just a little bit about your background and how you got so passionate in just resilience itself? Where does that come from?
Yes, certainly. And thank you for the invitation to be on your show. I'm very happy to be here. I started my career in brain research, actually, because I want to understand where and how learning and memory took place in the brain. But very quickly, I realized that in my work, I wanted to be able to ask my subjects what they were feeling. And I couldn't ask the animals that I was working with those questions. So I knew right away I wanted to get into more clinical work. And my first entry into clinical was in addiction. I did a postdoctoral fellowship from the National Institute on Drug Abuse on conditioned aspects of addiction. And very quickly, I realized that one of the primary modulators of how well a person does, how vulnerable they are to addiction, how vulnerable they are to relapse, was stress, and how well or poorly they handled stress. And, we all struggle with stress, but I found in that context how impactful that was in terms of whether they relapsed, et cetera. When I moved into a broader context of my clinical work, the same thing was true. We can go along really well in life until the stresses build up, and they strain our ability to cope, basically. And they trigger all kinds of physical, mental, emotional issues. So when I moved into a broader context of clinical work, I realized that stress is maybe one of the most important factors in terms of our mental, physical, emotional health. And last year, I did a summit where I was the host with 50 world leaders in longevity. And we talked about all topics that had to do with longevity, but the one factor that influences all the others, stress. Stress speeds up the aging process. And so stress can be considered to be one of the key factors in all illnesses, whether it's cause or making the situation worse. So I wanted to help people deal with their stress, but very quickly I realized people have resistance to dealing with their stress. People have a lot of resistance. And so that took me down this other road of where's this resistance coming from? And of course, one of the keys to our resistance is that stress is not just bad, that within a certain range, stress is necessary, important, and mobilizes us, motivates us, helps us create focus in what we're doing, and really contributes to our success. In fact, if you think about all the successes in your life, I guarantee that almost all of them have been associated with stress. So we have, what does our brain do? Neurons that fire together, wire together. So we've got these connections in our brain between stress and success. So it's important for your audience to realize that we can think about stress as something that does serve us if we keep it in the optimal range. And that's the key. And so that's why I switched into a model of resilience, because I wanted to help people find that optimal range. So it's not about good or bad. It's about how do I stay in that window of optimal functioning? And basically, my model of resilience is really a model of optimal functioning. And it turns out that the more resilient you are, the wider that window of optimal functioning is. In other words, you can expand that window of the range of activation of your nervous system that's optimal, the more resilient you become.
That's a great start into this. And honestly, your first answer already brought up 5 things that I want to ask you about. I think the broadest one is, because I know you have a great background in addiction and other things. I had Dr. Kenneth Bloom on the show. I mean, his big thing is addiction, the psychoneuropharmacologist. We talked about the reward deficiency syndrome and his GARS, genetic assessment risk score, and things like that. But one of the interesting things about what you talk about and being in a situation where you're overstressed, and you talk about anti-aging and things like that, is the concept of epigenetics. And so what I'm really fascinated by and want the audience to understand is that just from the thoughts, neurons that fire together, wire together, just from the thoughts that you have, you literally are stimulating different genes to be turned on and off. And that's why there's such a connection between your stress levels and being in that fight or flight state all the time, and the physical manifestations that you get from different genes being turned on and off. Do you want to talk a little bit about what epigenetics is and how the staying in an optimal state of stress is so much better for the genes that we end up expressing?
Right. So a lot of people have this notion about, I have this gene for a particular illness or this gene for a certain propensity. Well, there are a lot of people that have those genes and they never get those illnesses. And our environment and how we live our lives will determine whether certain genes get expressed or not. And whether they do or don't is based on what you just referred to as epigenetics. Epi means above the genetics. So this is a revolutionary concept, because we know, and we've always known, that you can't change your genes, but the environment affects our genes through epigenetics, what we're talking about right now. And so it's something that's laid down on top of our genes. And stress is one of the key factors that influence those effects, those epigenetic effects. And so it's very important for us to keep that level of stress in that window that we're talking about, that optimal window, so that we don't trigger some of these vulnerabilities of our genetic makeup.
I'm a big Joe Dispenza fan, so I'm always, listening to his audiobooks and things. I have not had the opportunity to go out to one of his retreats, but I do want to. I've had one guest that did his retreat. Actually, I think I had 2 guests that have done his retreats, interestingly enough. But one of the things that he always talks about, and other people like yourself, that people just talk about this very concept, is that, we can think ourselves sick, right? We can literally think ourselves sick by turning on those genes and just being in a chronic stress situation. But I like the positive version of it. We can literally think ourselves well. And so being in certain mindsets and in the right frame of stress can lead to wellness, productivity, feeling good, having a mission, being purposeful, all those things that you talk about in your book. And so I think that all is more of a lay way of talking about epigenetics. And just basically, that's why I and many other, lots of people talk about just always being in a positive mindset, or as much as you can. And I know that's a big part of your resilience kind of package, because when you're positive, when you think you're going to have a good day, when you think things are going to go well, when you think your surgery is going to go well, all of those things contribute into positive outcomes. And so, yeah, thank you for that response. I think that that stuff is great. Just one other little thing. It's interesting because it brought something up, just a random connection. You talk about being in an optimal stress state, and I love the way you said it. You said, a little bit of stress is good. And you're absolutely right. Everything that we usually accomplish, right? Being a good athlete, winning that match, getting a grade on your exam, all those things, they come with some level of stress. It's not stress-free. If it's stress-free, that means you're too relaxed and you're probably not going to accomplish, much in that. So getting out of our comfort zones, doing that. But one of the things that it stimulated was it's very similar to what we're seeing on a more biological kind of front. When it comes to something called reactive oxygen species, we always talk about how that you can get damage and free radical damage on all this stuff. Interestingly enough, I'm very much into biohacks and photobiomodulation, all these other things that are out here. If you stimulate a small amount of reactive oxygen species, it actually tells your body to make anti-inflammatory chemicals. So it's just brilliant. So it's kind of like that, like giving yourself the right amount of stress or a low level of stress that is healthy stress, then you are stimulating positive things. Does that sound about right?
First, Joe was one of the people I interviewed for my longevity summit, and his work is great. And it's very important for a particular reason. We know the power of our minds. Yes. But what's beautiful about Joe's work is that he has the research to back it up. And that's so important. It's like you can talk all you want about theory and what should be, but when he comes up with the data that actually shows a change based on mindset, based on meditation, based on relaxation, it gives you the evidence that what we're talking about is actually real. So one of the ways I like to talk about it is that bodies have limited personal energy, right? Yes. And so the body is always making a choice. Where am I going to send that energy? Am I going to send it to my muscles to protect myself, or am I going to send it to my kidneys to purify my blood? And so I like to say that the body has two choices. It can go into defend and protect, or it can go into heal and maintain and grow. And you could do just so much defend and protect before you have problems with the healing and growth. And so that's sort of like the basis of that. But you also need to find time and ways to go into deep levels of calm, because that's where the greatest healing takes place.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to second you on Dispenza's work, it's amazing. I mean, he has evidence both from, he likes to talk about all of these neurochemicals that are released. They have all these evidence on this stuff. I call it, I've done posts on this on my social media about the hormones of love versus the hormones of stress. By thinking positively, by going into these incredible calm states where we are in a parasympathetic tone, we are flooding our body with just healing, just a waterfall of healing. It's like almost going into the fountain of youth, where on the flip side, when we are in those bad states and are super stressed and are overwhelmed and are just feeling ill, we can make ourselves sick by being, having flooded with catecholamines and cortisol issues and all kinds of other stuff that are creating damage, not to mention telomere shortening. And we can, without getting into the genetics, which is, that's not really what the audience is more about. How can they pick up ideas and techniques into being in these states so they can be better and being in the states? And what he showed through his research is true. And people won't believe it until you show the evidence behind it, because otherwise it's just, right, it's pseudoscience.
So that's one of the reasons why I do biofeedback. So biofeedback is a way of monitoring some aspect of our physiology, feeding that information back so we could literally get it under our control. And so one type of biofeedback that I do is heart rate variability biofeedback. And this is the proven method in which we bring different physiological systems into alignment in our bodies. And it turns out that when we breathe at approximately 6 breaths per minute. We go into a heart rate pattern referred to as coherence. And what that looks like is that as we breathe in, our heart rate goes up. As we breathe out, our heart rate goes down. That's because when we're breathing in, we're activating the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. And when we breathe out, we're activating the parasympathetic. So we have this nice synchronous pattern as we train ourselves at 6 breaths per minute. Well, it turns out that one of the factors that contributes to that notion of coherence is our emotional state. So if we, while we're doing this, if we focus on the emotion of gratitude and love, we facilitate this pattern. On the other hand, if we go into an emotional state of frustration, anger, anxiety, that pattern becomes chaotic. And so we can see from that our emotions directly impact our physiology. Now, another thing that's so interesting is if you and I were in the same room right now and we were standing close to each other, I'd be able to pick out my heart rate pattern in your brainwaves.
That's incredible. I have not heard that before.
Yeah. So what's the implication of that? My emotional state is being registered in your brainwaves. Wow. So aside from the physiological implications, what are the emotional intersocial implications of that? You're going to maybe have a different emotional state, and you may not have any idea what it's about, but you're next to one person, you have one kind of reaction. You're next to another person, you have a very different kind of reaction. And you're thinking, what's going on here? But people project their emotional state in different ways.
I actually didn't know that specifically, that is registered inside the brain. I always talk about the positive vibrational energy and the way that it can create changes just in a room. So for example, as a surgeon, myself, when I go into rooms and do cases, I literally make it an effort, number one, to try to get myself in the absolute best mood possible, because it's very important as far as getting into the right flow state and things like that. But yes, bringing positive energy. Hey guys, it's going to be a great day, great team. You guys having a good day, all that stuff, but actually feeling that and vibrating at a good vibrational frequency. Okay. Obviously some of my audience is like, strange to hear a spine surgeon talk this way, but it's important. This is like really important stuff. It is infectious. So people say, happiness is infectious, and so is despair and not gratitude. All those things, you're bringing that positive vibrational energy and you're quantifying it more on a scientific plane, just saying it's actually registering in our brains. So we can actually change, we can manifest in the physical world our vibrational energy, and that goes for healing. And that's why obviously we have some very similar interests in healing the body with thoughts alone, literally. And that's what your book is all about in a way. You're presenting it in a very unique, very, very practical way for people to do it. Not everybody wants to sit around talking about the quantum theory and how we have infinite possibilities in every all that. I love that stuff because it's all about how energy we can control the quantum field. But the easier way to do it is say, hey, we've got these 9 pillars, and if you follow them and use some of my methodology going forward, this might be a great way to manage your overall stress. That brings me into like a really huge question. In today's day and age, there's so much going on, right? We've got mass media. It's just bombarded. We've got social media. We've got just a world that is moving at a fast pace. We've got the advent of the AI. Things have changed a lot. It's a nonstop. We have obsession left and right? Obsessive parents about their kids, and everything is magnified. And I see them all around me. They are very stressed out. It definitely is affecting my patients. They've got a million things going on with their own lives. And that's why we really try to, focus on that stuff. So in addition to how fast we're going, why in general are people having such a hard time managing their stress in today's society?
Well, I think all the things that you just mentioned are a major cause of it. But the next issue is that as a result of that, people feel overwhelmed. People feel like there's so much to be done. Where do I even begin? And in my book, I try to address exactly that. So my book is not designed just to give information. It's designed to get results. And when you think about being resilient, when you think about managing stress, you see the result as being all the ways down the road. And that could be overwhelming. That could be, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm working on this, but then what about this over here? And what about that over here? And that's why, in conjunction with my model of 9 pillars of resilience, I've created this construct of the path. And the notion of the path is the path, which is right here alongside all of us. And it's right here today. Okay. How do I get onto the path? Look at my model and take 1 or 2 steps based on 1 or 2 of the pillars. And that puts you on the path. If you're on the path, then you're golden. If you're on the path, then you're on the road to ultimate success. So I take this model and this concept and I turn it into something that's achievable on a daily basis. Today, what do I want to do that puts me on the path? And so I could look at my book and whether I do the first pillar, the second, third, or fourth, let me follow one of these steps, a couple of these steps, and that puts me on the path. Because I want people to be doing anything along the way to get onto the path. It's not about how much you do, it's about doing something. And so to address people's overwhelm, I create this notion of the path that's always there, always accessible. And if you fall off the path, well, you can go to the book, take a couple of steps and get back onto the path. So many of the people that have been working with my model report to me that that's what's made a difference in their lives. It's made the goal of resilience more achievable, more within reach.
So one of the things I really like that I get a sense of in your book, as far as being on the path, is this notion that I want you to talk about some about being adaptable, just this adaptability versus having a fixed mindset. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, but underneath the surface on that, one of the things that really is such an important thing for me to manage my stresses and everything that I've got going on in my life. And I see that this notion that you talk about of kind of looking inward for what happens to you, sort of having control over what you do versus the external thought. Everything's happening to me because of this, and that. And I think it's so critical for people. One of my favorite people out there, he's an entrepreneur, but he's a very motivational guy. His name is Gary Vaynerchuk. And well, number one, we're both diehard Jet fans, being from New York City. I don't know if you're a Jet fan. We're both from the Bronx. We talked about that earlier, which is a crazy coincidence. But anyway, Gary, his goal is he wants to buy the New York Jets at some point. But he always talks about that. And he always says the same thing. He's like, you know how you get really, really happy when you just decide that everything that happens to you is because of you, because of the things that you do. That is no. Now, clearly, we don't know. If you get hit by a bus, it's probably not your fault unless you didn't look or something like, the things happen. But in general, it is about taking accountability for what you do, because guess what? That gives us more control. That gives us more control. And that's why anytime I hear my kids say something like, I'm like, why didn't you do this? Oh, it was because of that guy, or this happened, or my teacher didn't do it right, or she didn't give us the book, or some kind of excuse. That is a way to feel frustrated, depressed. That is the opposite of resilience to me, because then you're pointing to, in the childish way, those external factors. So anyway, can you just talk about like some of this adaptability versus just having a hard, concrete, fixed mindset, and some of the other things I just kind of threw out there?
Yes, and I think this is such an important area. And I say, when we talk about excuses, I say, an excuse could make you feel good, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And it's interesting. I had a client come in to see me. She was referred by her physician for her physical symptoms following an automobile accident. And so I'm taking her history, and she's telling me about her automobile accident. And then she's telling me that this is the 5th accident she's had in 2 years. And then the kicker was, she said, none of them were my fault. But as she walked out of my office and she was heading toward the door, she bumped into my desk. And it was clear to me that she was up in her head, thinking about the next thing, or she was going to do and wasn't present. And because she wasn't present in those 5 accidents, even though maybe someone else was at fault, she was not present in order to avoid the accident. And then presence is my 7th pillar of resilience. And back to what you said before, in order to make any changes in your life, it begins by being present. Because if we're not present, we go into our automatic patterns. And you talked about adaptability. We have an amazing ability to adapt. In our childhood, we do a tremendous ability to adapt to our childhood environment. And what's our childhood environment? Well, we're dependent on our primary caregivers for sustenance, for the basic survival ingredients. And so we do a great job of adapting to that environment. But then to a great extent, our ability to adapt gets frozen to that environment. So that as an adult, we're seeing the world through the lens of those lessons of childhood. So we walk into a room, and if our parents judged us as a child, were critical of us as a child, we walk into a room, we're expecting that from the people in that room. And so a growth mindset is a mindset that says those lessons were probably not accurate. They probably don't serve me now. It's up to me, not the environment, not for the environment to be different, as you just mentioned. It's up to me to make new adjustments, new adaptation to this world. And that includes when you do something well, to take it in and own it. Because if we got the message we're not okay as a child, we hold on to that message unless we have a growth mindset to start looking at the things today and allowing new lessons, new experience to modify our thinking. So that's a growth mindset, is to allow new information to influence how we relate to the world.
What's interesting about the growth versus fixed mindset, we talk a lot about this in our household, but I also talk about it, from a business standpoint and other things. It's so interesting to see people's successes in life and how they feel about themselves, and how much better adaptable people do that have a growth mindset, and they're always looking, they're always critiquing, they're looking inward, as you talk about it, especially pillar 1, a better relationship with themselves. They really understand themselves and can go into that deep space, or, as David Goggins says, the accountability mirror, just looking at yourself and just say, you have to hold yourself accountable and understand all these. But anyway, going backward, it's so interesting even to see the people that I kind of came up with in the medical world, but even people outside of that, just people in my circles, the people that have been adaptable and have changed and are really different people, the way they think now than when they were, 19 years old, do so much better. But how many people in their middle ages and up are still that same kid from high school, where every external thing controls literally the way they feel from moment to moment? It's literally the opposite of mindfulness and quiet and relaxation. You cannot function well being in that stage. You cannot function if you blame everything on what is happening in your surrounding world.
Absolutely. Let me give your audience a key to what we're talking about right now, because we talked about how our childhood environments create certain lessons. Those lessons get incorporated into the voice we hear 24/7, our internal voice, which I like to refer to as our internal parent. So we take the lessons of our childhood, and they form this internal parent that we hear 24/7. And that internal parent, we don't really recognize as being, we never think to question it. It's almost like being a fish in water. Does a fish know it's in water? So it's important to start noticing the messages that internal parent, that internal voice are giving to you, and notice whether those are negative or not. John Gottman is a psychologist at the University of Washington that does a lot of work with couples. And he actually has a studio with cameras in every room, and couples go there and spend the weekend there. And of course, after a few hours, they don't realize that they're being filmed 24/7, right? But as a result, he's able to actually do a study in which he notices and rates each interaction, whether it's positive or negative. And he found that in a healthy relationship, that ratio is 20-1 positive to negative.
Wow.
In a relationship that's in trouble, that's dropped down to 5-1. So I'm going to invite all your audience to start noticing how you talk to yourself. And I want you to determine what I've used this term, your Gottman ratio is with yourself. What's your Gottman ratio? Is it 20-1, 5-1, or for some of you, it may be 1-5, where it's more negative. And so this first step is to pay attention and notice how you talk to yourself. And I guarantee you, anytime you're feeling upset, anytime you're worried, anytime you're stressed, if you look to the messages you're giving to yourself, that will be the origins of why you're feeling the way you are, because of that voice. Now, I can't just that's just one half of the story. The other half of the story is, what would a healthy internal parent, a healthy internal voice be saying to you? Where's that healthy one coming from? And this is the model of a healthy internal parent, coming from a place of love, compassion, acceptance, support, self-care, and joy. So now you have the comparison. Are you talking to yourself the way a healthy internal parent does? If not, and back to what you said earlier, when we're focused on the outside world, it's because our internal voice, internal parent, is looking outside for validation, is worried about what's going on outside. When you're coming from a healthy internal voice, when you migrate, make this transition over here, you're now grounding yourself within yourself. And when you ground yourself within yourself, you are in a much better place of balance and less likely to be triggered by outside external events.
So how do you counsel your patients that are really struggling in stressful situations and are not doing good, and you've identified it that their Gottman ratio is 1-5 in the wrong way, and they're continually talking to themselves? What are the top pieces of advice? How can they even hear that internal voice and cut through all the noise of all the things we talk about before, all the distractions and everything that's going on and the bombardment of negative thoughts that they're having? How do they hear that voice or change it?
So some of the things I just spoke of are the first steps, which is about awareness. Awareness that the source of the discomfort is the messages that you're giving to yourself. And so because that part of ourselves is so powerful, we don't realize that it's operating. It's just who we are. So the first step is separating us from this voice and being able to observe that voice. Look at how I'm talking to myself, and then defining what a healthy voice is like. And now look at the comparison. Again, it's an awareness process. It's an awareness of how I'm doing it, awareness of the better way to do it. And then the next step is to strengthen the new voice. And the way you strengthen the new voice is simply to remember to go there and speak from that place. So I will say to a person I'm working with, I want you to go into your healthy internal parent and have your healthy internal parent speak. Because every time you hear your healthy internal parent speak, you're creating change in your brain. The more you speak from that place, the more change will take place. And the goal is to shift that balance of power between those two. We start off with this being all powerful. We separate it out so that we can notice and we could realize that it doesn't have to be that way. And by separating it out, we address what you mentioned earlier. It's not in our genes. That voice is not in our genes. That's learned behavior that, with a growth mindset, can be unlearned when we have another approach that's more effective.
I love the answer. I love the concept of that good parent and going there. It's, I think, from a standpoint of understanding what you're saying, it's true, but it is hard for some people to get there because they're really, really in a tough position.
Because you just gave exactly the response that a lot of my clients say, which is how hard it is, how difficult. And that is an indication of mindset. And this is very important around mindset. And this is my fifth pillar of resilience, mental balance and mastery. And what I want people to recognize is the first reaction to a situation. If you say that's difficult, that's hard, you are already sending yourself down a certain path. Right? I have people catch themselves. Oh, look what I'm doing. I am going in the negative direction, because if I say it's hard, difficult, it actually makes it more difficult. Now, if it's something I need to be doing, whether it's hard or difficult is irrelevant. If I need to be doing it, I don't want to focus on that it's hard or difficult. I want to focus on this is what I need to be doing. That's the positive direction. This is a challenge. Let me rise to the occasion of this challenge, because when I handle the challenge, I grow my capacity. When I handle the challenge, I learn something. And this takes me into another very important concept. This is something like I have an issue with when everybody talks about resilience is about bouncing back, right? We all hear that.
Yes.
Okay. Wrong. Resilience is not about bouncing back. You don't want to bounce back to where you were, because anytime you engage in a challenge, anytime you work hard to accomplish something, you want to learn the lesson and you're bouncing forward. You're using the challenge, the experience to grow. So everything in your life becomes an aspect of this growth mindset.
I mean, that's great. And I'm going to try to use words like difficult less around you. I'm going to say it's a challenge. Good. I'm learning myself.
By the way, let me also say, going back to what you said earlier, which I really, really appreciated when you talked about how you enter a surgery.
Yes.
I really think that's great. One of the roles I've had at UCLA is working in the doctoring program. So I teach medical students all the things that they don't get in medical school, including emotional state, mental state, how to deal with burnout, and bedside manner. And I teach the medical students that I work with exactly what you were talking about, that your attitude when you meet the patient is so important in how effective you are in that encounter. So I wanted to acknowledge and appreciate you for having that, because it is, for physicians, it's so important.
No, it's hugely important. Actually, that's something I do talk about a lot. I just did a post on social media and all my social media channels. It was about a week ago or so, where I actually did a post from a hospital bed myself. And I said, first thing I said is, no, I'm not having a procedure. Don't worry. This isn't like I'm undergoing a procedure today. But what I wanted to say is that at any moment, we could be in that position of being the patient, and how scared patients are, and how, new this is to them. This isn't routine to them as it might be for me or the nurse or whoever's in the room, in the preoperative area or postoperative or whatever, and how important it is for us to bring our best positive selves every time we have these interactions, because those interactions are so important into the perception of what is going on. So in other words, feeling, confident, we're positive. How are you, Mrs. Jones? We really want to help you. We understand. We want to talk to the families and just really spread. Listen, sometimes the situation is dire, right? When we're doing surgery on people, but a lot of times it's more elective. It's other things, and people are very scared, and just putting ourselves. And so kind of the gist of my post was more, listen, we all have our own stuff going on, but when we're communicating with others and interacting on that level, there really is no room for us to bring in our sorrows or our, oh my God, this didn't happen for me this morning, or I was late for this meeting, or my traffic jam was, just destroyed my whole day. My life is horrible. This person's having an operation. They're having a procedure. They're scared. The family's scared. And so how I present myself, how the nurse presents themselves, how the G-Tech and the IV, the phlebotomist, whoever, if everybody comes in there with a positive, mindset, just saying, hey, we're here to take care of you. I know you're scared. We want to make you well. Let's do this together. We're there for you. What can we do for you or your family? You know what a difference it makes in the quality of their experience, but not to mention literally their outcomes can be different just by doing that. And it is something that I love the fact that you're teaching that kind of stuff to medical students. And I think we cannot shout that type of stuff enough. And it's so important and it makes such an impact and a difference. So that was my comment on that. So on the getting from point A to point B, as far as actionable steps, what I wanted to get at and on our challenge of getting past that negative parent speak and all that stuff, I wanted to talk about where, as far as your training and how you train your patients, meditation is huge. Affirmations are huge. How do you incorporate meditation and affirmations into your practice? And how do you get the average Joe to do some of these things, which are so foreign for so many people? Meditation and affirmations, and literally, quite frankly, sitting alone in a room by themselves without looking at a cell phone or a screen or doing something to get their mind off of life is almost foreign to them. So, first of all, how important are those things and how do you get people to do it?
They are very important. Again, my model has 9 pillars to it. So each one of those pillars contributes to resilience. Okay. So that means that there are a lot of things that need to be done, but we don't want to feel overwhelmed by it. Early on in my own personal meditation, I struggled with it and I would give up and I would come back to it and I would give up and I would come back to it. And then I decided, well, okay, what's the struggle all about? And what I realized for me, and I think this is true for so many, is that as I was doing it, I was judging. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it well enough? What are the results? Do I see results? So I questioned, and it was that questioning and worrying. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I should doing it, I don't think I'm getting the results. That created resistance to going back and continuing. And so what made a difference was going into a place of acceptance. And I would say to people, this is a very major piece of resilience, and following through is coming from a place of acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean you like something. It's just an acknowledgement of what is. If I always forget my keys, and I can get upset with myself, or I can acknowledge right now I'm a person that's so distracted with all the things going on in my life that I don't even remember where I put them down. So how am I going to remember where they are? So acceptance doesn't change circumstances, change that I want to get better at that, but it makes the results more possible. And so in that recognition, I went back to meditating without holding any expectation, and just deciding that if I'm sitting with myself for a period of time and I'm following what the suggestions are, even if I come away, fall, go get distracted and then bring myself back, I'm okay. And I was much better able to stay with it. So that's an important lesson for all of your audience, is that notion of acceptance. That's part of a growth mindset. It's going to take a while. How long? It's different from one person to the other. And there's no rules, there's no markers that say you're doing it too slowly, too fast, accept whatever pace you're on. And then combine that with the notion of the path, where, okay, today, let me do something to put myself on the path. And then feel good that you're following through in the way you're following through. And then if you fall off, what can I do to get back on? And so you can, at any one time, you can ask yourself one question: am I on or off the path? And if I'm off the path, okay, go to the book and come up with a couple of the steps there, and it'll put you back onto the path. That's the approach. That's what keeps you engaged in the process. And ultimately, that's the most important thing, staying engaged in the process.
Yeah, I think that's great. And look at your 9 pillars. If you do 1 or 2 of them, like you said, it makes a huge difference, because, like, for example, like looking at your relationship with others, right? Or having that adaptability mindset, or your relationship with yours. Even if you fix one of the areas, if you fix all 9, then you're in nirvana, right? But if you fix a couple of those areas, it's going to make a massive difference into the way, you feel. Going back to the meditation thing, because I think a lot of our viewers, I meditate myself. When I'm meditating, I feel it's the best that I feel, and it's great. And I have a lot going on. And then sometimes that negative voice comes in my head too. It's not going to do anything. I'm not going to do it right. I'm not going to get into my, meditation zone. I'm just going to be having thoughts about my day or how many surgeries I have tomorrow, or whatever's going on. But as far as thinking about like meditation itself and the concept of the elephant and the rider, right? That whole concept about controlling, having that voice in your head. Can you explain a little bit more what can happen in meditation where the meditation itself can make you understand what the voice in your head is saying and then look at it from a non-judgmental standpoint and be accepting of the things you're hearing, right? Because it's supposed to be in a non-judgmental environment, and then how that leads to the positive changes that happen. I know there's a lot to unpack there, but just for people that just don't even want to start they just need, it's so important though, and can make such a difference in their overall resilience.
Yeah, so the first thing I tell people is I'd like you to do 10 minutes of this, whether it's a relaxation, whether it's a meditation, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's biofeedback. I'd like you to do 10 minutes a day. However, if you're finding that you're not doing it, then cut that down to 5 minutes a day. Because sometimes people say, I don't have 10 minutes. But I say, I don't know who cannot come up with 5 minutes. But okay, if you can't do 5 minutes, my goal is for you to sit down with the process every day. So if all you can do is 1 minute, do 1 minute. If they don't, now we're dealing with their resistance to the process. We're not dealing with any discomfort with that 1 minute, okay? So we get to the heart of the issue one way or the other, okay? It's a key, as you said, it's key. But for example, self-judgment may be the most important thing you work on in the process of meditation. It may not be how to relax deeply. It may be, how do I let go of these judgments? And so that becomes the goal of the process. Now, people say, oh, how do you let go of judgment? Well, you do it one judgment at a time. Growth mindset. People give up. Oh, I started judging again. I can't do this. That's a common refrain. I can't do this. No, that's not true. If you stick with it, you'll get better at it. And that's the key, is sticking with it with no judgment and acceptance. So every time you catch yourself going away and you bring yourself back, you are learning a lesson. The more times you do it and come back, the more lessons you are learning. Acceptance leads to a greater ability to be persistent, but find the time range that works for you and then try to grow that time range.
Yeah,
One of the reasons I like biofeedback is that as you're doing it, you're getting feedback, which is so important to some people, letting them know, am I being successful in this? So you have to find the approach that works best for you.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've become very into, what I would say term the word biohacks and different things, but it's interesting that what I like about meditation or anything, all the things you said before, being in gratitude, all this stuff, it puts us in that parasympathetic, mood, which is so important with the hormones of love, which we talked about before. But even things like combining some of these relaxation techniques, meditation, whatever you want to do, with things like a vagal nerve stimulator, which literally like stimulates you into that it's a hack, right? You're doing it without having to do all those things. Or some of these apps, I had this Kirti Sundar, who was the chief scientific officer for a company called Newcom, which are these diurnal beats that put you into a state of parasympathetic, kind of overload. And it's been heavily studied in the military. That's where they did a lot of their results are incredible. So I think a combination of all these things, as far as de-stressing us or getting rid of some of the bad stressors, between meditation, some of these hacks we can do, and other things, it's just fascinating. But it's about doing it. It's like you said, it's about accepting the fact that you are living in a state of chronic stress and worry, and it is self-sabotaging. And it's also, it's really hurting your physical being by being in these states. And so following, I think, your 9 pillars is going to make a huge, difference for people. One of the things that I wanted to, and again, it goes back, it all ties into what we talked about. One of my biggest concerns in medicine, which is what's going on, is that we are throwing a ridiculous amount of dollars after all of this chronic disease. Now, a lot of it is nutrition, diet, lifestyle, but but this component that you talk about, and by the way, for our listeners, May is Mental Health Month, and this could not come at a better time. Your book release, us talking, all this stuff, because it's in, but if you have a chronic illness or whatever, any type, living in chronic stress is going to do nothing more than magnify that. So I think that we cannot look at it from a medical standpoint without looking at all the mental health issues that happen. And a lot of it has to do with the thoughts that are in our head. And I just love the way that your book really it's just all about how we think about the world and making those positive changes. And if people follow some of these changes, their mental health is going to improve, and then their physical health is going to improve, and anything we can do to fix that chronic health. And I would imagine, if I'm not wrong, a lot of your practice or physicians sending you patients that have all kinds of chronic health problems, and then they follow your protocol, and not only is their outlook better, but they're better, right? You're helping their physicians help them.
Yes, and that's definitely the case. There are a group of physicians that recognize the connection between resilience and the physical symptoms that they deal with. In fact, I have a number of physicians as clients in my practice as well, who want to be more resilient. But these issues that we're talking about, they funnel into impact on our physiology, biochemistry, and symptoms. And so you want to get into a better resilient state, so you ward those things off, because that's a lot easier than once you have the symptoms and now you have to heal from them, which is also possible. But ultimately, all of these 9 pillars of resilience distill down to how to make your body function optimally. And when your body functions optimally, you're going to ward off illness, disease, mental and emotional dysregulation as well.
So, as far as resilience, obviously, I think it's great for physicians. Your book is amazing because we are obviously under a high level of stress. I think it's good for those, but just for regular folks, I think I'm glad that, I came across your book, because it is going to be another tool in my toolbox actually to give my patients. I am acutely aware of how difficult people are struggling with their mental health issues. Some of it is serious mental health issues where they need much higher level care, but some is not having resilience or that moving forward that you talk about. And so I think it gives me a tool to give them to help themselves, because I talk to people all day long, obviously in my clinics, and the stuff the negativity that comes out of their their mouths, sometimes it depresses me, so I have to shift it and get positive, because I don't want to take on their energy. So I just try to do my positive thing. I'm always try to be super positive about it. But I think that if patients themselves, or just the general public, but for me, my patients really followed your advice on these 9 pillars, boy, it's going to help them so much to deal with their serious issues and actually help them with their pain, because getting your stress under control makes a huge, this has been well studied, right? High stress increases your pain. This is not some rocket science thing. But the question and something I hear a lot of, and this is when I really have to turn the tide. I've asked numerous people that I've had on my show how they deal with this, and advice that they can give, and kind of how they handle it. So many of my patients, because they have been through a lot over the years, and it's not just their back or neck pain or whatever else is going on, multiple surgeries, but also personal things in their lives. A lot of people that are, sometimes they're not even at middle age yet. They're still young, they're really young, right? But even middle-aged people, and again, the older, I get, the more, the bar for being young keeps going up. For all of these people, we have so many, and I'm meeting them for the first time sometimes, and they've given up on the ability to lead any type of a good life. And they are basically resigned to the fact that, hey, my life is going to suck and there's nothing I can do about it. And this is what happens to everybody when they hit 50. Life just sucks, and move on. And that literally is the opposite of resilience. what would be your strategy if I sent you one of my patients and I said, you know what, you need Sideroff. This is beyond my ability to talk to you. I got to send you out to the West Coast to see Dr. Sideroff and really, talk for quite a while, maybe stay out there for a couple of weeks. What are the strategies from a resilience standpoint to get them to understand that there's things to look for, and it doesn't have to be this way. This isn't normal.
So interesting, you mentioned send them out to the West Coast, because I have an intensive program that is varying from 3-5 days a week, where I bring together about 10 professionals, each with a different focus. And we meet with the individual, each focusing on a different approach, which is tremendously effective. But to answer your question, and one of the goals of my book is to give people hope, that it's exactly the people that you're talking about who've given up and well, I guess my life is just going to be miserable like this. It doesn't have to be. And here's the path that will take you where you need to be going. And you, not only that, but you can get on the path today. You don't have to wait until you do a whole bunch of things and you're all the ways down the road. That path is available to you today. And so by giving people hope, it shifts their whole mindset. It shifts their own pattern. And so it already in day one, a lot of people that come to me and I have a meeting with them and I go through my model in the path, they leave the first session feeling lighter. Wow. Okay. There is something I can do. There is some way I can address this. It's not going to happen immediately, but immediately I can get on the path. All of those things make a big difference for even the person, as you identified, with feeling hopeless.
Yeah, and I think that goes into your pillar number 3, which is really having that defined purpose in life. And those, because when you have something to look for, some of the strategies that I've had some of my guests or just colleagues that I talk to, they just talk about, like, for example, if you have somebody that has a lot of chronic pain and they're just completely given up, you say, well, what are your goals in life? What do you want to do? And sometimes it's as easy as, hey, I want to go to my kid's graduation in a year and be able to dance at the party. Right. And we just have to get that out. And I think is our responsibility as providers that are seeing patients, even when we are not that specialty. Like, I'm a spine surgeon. Like, what we might think, hey, what does mental health have to do with what I do? Unless the patients obviously are psychotic or severely clinically depressed, where we're like, we can't do surgery on them because it's never going to work, or they're on too many, narcotics or whatever it is. I think it's so important for us to really talk about what their goals, dreams, and hopes are within your pillar 3, to really understand what they're trying to reach, and then have a shared goal and figure out how we can get them down the path. And utilizing, mental health experts like yourself has become a big thing in my world, because it's so valuable for them to have that special time and that extra care talking to people like you, which is going to make my job a lot easier, dealing with their chronic, 15 years of pain and, 9 previous surgeries or whatever, walks through the door. So I just cannot stress to our audience how important it is for people, whether you're lay or whether you're in the healthcare industry, to really focus on mental health and keep people like yourself in mind. And if we have to send them to California to hang out with you, we'll have to send them to California to hang out with you if that's really the best option. So I think just such valuable nuggets that folks are going to get out of your book. The easiest way, though, for me is I just say, hey, let's open Amazon, go get this book once it's available out there. Is there anything that we left out here that is in your book? Obviously, it's a long book. It's really a guide for people over time, and it doesn't have to be all at once. Is there any information that you want to get out to the listeners? Anything that we missed as far as how important it is for them to focus on resiliency and how that is going to just impact their entire life?
Well, we covered a lot of territory. Thank you. I would say that one of the things that I tell people, particularly people who are struggling like you just talked about, and I say, no matter what state you're in, no matter where you are in your life, there's always a best way. Because a lot of people come in to see me or you, and they're so discouraged that in order to take a step, it seems like it's so far away. And if you translate that into wherever you are right here, right now, there's always a best way. It automatically takes the thinking in that direction of, well, what's the best way? And once you're doing that, you're in the positive and the growth mindset. So there's a place to start by saying, I'm going to find the best way. There's a place to start, which is seeing any difficulty in your life as a challenge, to realize that anytime you take the challenge, you're giving yourself an opportunity to grow. So all of these things send us in the direction that we want to be going in. And then if you combine that with checking in with your internal voice to see if it supports you or it's getting in your way, and it's time to not accept an internal voice that's getting in your way. It's time to say no to that. And that's another big part, is saying no to something that doesn't serve you.
And unfortunately, sometimes that voice is the loudest voice in your head. And again, you need to seek some type of help, whether it's internal or external, to make the changes necessary to have that good parent voice come into, into your brain or whatever. Because, so one of the things that we always bring up is when you hear that voice in your head. I read a lot of Buddhist texts. I love this stuff, and Joe Dispenza and all these other guys. It's like, that age-old question, that voice that's speaking to us in our heads, who is that? Is that you, or is the listener you? Which one is you? And that's that I brought up the elephant and the rider. Yep. And it is something that unless we are willing to listen to that voice, if we just passively accept whatever these voices are in our heads, and don't actively investigate it and get to know ourselves, pillar one, it's very difficult then to move on to anything else, because you're just on some autopilot, and it's just those same thoughts are just rewiring, they're negative, and then it leads to a chronic spiral of mental health problems and physical health problems.
Right. And associated with this, very much connected to this, my second pillar, relationship with others. Sometimes we're listening to that negative voice inside ourselves without any discernment and just listening. But sometimes it's somebody in our lives who give us the negative, and there also we don't do discernment and we just listen without saying to ourselves, no, that's not serving me. The judgments, the negativity, I'm not going to listen to that. A lot of times we have friends who don't send us in the right direction, but we just keep listening to them. So you have to notice the internal negative voice, and you have to notice the external negative voices. And whether it's internal or external, those are not influences you want to anymore accept.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a big part of, we talk about kind of having that positivity mind for and living in that positive vibrational energy state. It's very important who is around you. And it's fun. We know this. We can just talk like just personally, just from friends and family, like your friends, your family, my friends, my family. There's always those extremely negative people that are around us, and their negative vibrational energy really interferes with what we want to do, whether it be what they say or how they are around us. Is going to make a huge difference. It's so important to really let go of those people as far as you can. There's certain people that you just can't, because they're close family. You don't want to fracture relationships that way. That's the topic of a whole other discussion. But you can't, being around those people all the time is very, very negative and is not good for us. One of my favorite sayings, I've repeated this a million times, is by, Les Brown, amazing, the late Les Brown, amazing motivational speaker he was, but, other people's opinions are none of our business. And I just love that. And unfortunately, we a lot of times don't learn that until later in life, right? When you're a teenager and somebody posts something on social media or says something in the high school setting, it seems catastrophic. I do a lot of ventures. I started this new project. I'm doing all kinds of stuff that people would consider outside of my comfort zone. People say all kinds of stuff. Well, why are you doing that? That makes no sense. That's never going to work. Why wellness? All this stuff. And it is so funny. I am in such a different state. It literally doesn't faze me. I always tell my kids, if I could go back to my 20-year-old self and say, you know what the other people are saying really, really doesn't matter. It really has no bearing at all. It's what's inside that's important, because it's the way we perceive the world. We can choose to perceive it however we want. If I wake up today and say, I could have had my leg amputated yesterday, but if I wake up today and say, well, my God, the trees are green, the sky is blue. Well, it's not blue today, unfortunately, but whatever. And I said, this is the most wonderful day I've ever had. I'm so happy to be alive. This is going to be a great day. I can't wait to have that conversation with my wife or my kids. I can't wait for whatever, or read that book, or I just want to sit outside on a park bench for 3 hours and just sit there and just watch traffic go by, whatever. That's a different mindset. Today's going to suck. Everything's horrible. I hate my family. I don't want to see anybody. Oh my God, the news, fill yourself with bad news stories, all this stuff. So important.
Yeah, as I said, there's always a best way. You want to find that best way.
Yeah, and that goes the same with anything in medicine, right? There's many ways to do stuff, but there's usually a better way for the person to kind of get out. And what I want people to get out of this conversation too, and I want to say this also as a physician, most things can be made better. Most things can be made better. So most mental health issues that we struggle with, most physical ailments can be made better. Obviously, there's people that are terminal and there's things that we can't do much about, but the vast majority of things are changeable. And again, listening to people like yourself, which are, renowned authorities on these subjects, who can put it together in a way that's easily understandable, even for those that have never picked up a book on resilience or well-being or meditation. They don't know anything about Joe Dispenza, none of this stuff. They can just pick up your book from scratch and it can make a massive impact in their lives. So, thank you for, writing the book. And I'm very glad that, it came across my attention and really grabbed my attention. And it's really a great book and can't wait for it to come out. So can you tell our listeners when the big releases of the book and kind of where they can find you if they want to know more about what your plans are?
Yes, of course. So the book is launched on June 4th, 2024. So it's from our interview time. Whenever it shows, I don't know, but it's just a couple of weeks away from now. Up until June 4th, I actually have a promotional offer with a free bonus with purchase. And you can find all this information on my website, drstephensideroff.com. A bunch of my articles are on my website. Purchasing the book is on my website. The book is available right now on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble. Any way you want to purchase a book, it's available right now.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm sure that folks are going to be very excited about getting the book. My patients are going to be getting the book. One of my favorite books has nothing to do with the mental state, a book that I often give my patients. And so this I'm going to add to my armamentarium as I give them the Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code, which is so incredible for intermittent fasting and dealing with things like diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and reversing that. And it just talks about all the benefits and effects. So that's one of my go-to books as far as weight loss management and things like that. So definitely going to put this on the category of go-to books for mental health, resilience, wellness, also for my colleagues. And I'll be out there on social, definitely promoting the book because I believe in it. I would not be doing this. I don't get anything from, first of all, for our audience. This is just something where I just have personal interest in the book and everything that you're doing. So thank you for coming on. But yes, certainly I'll be out here. When I find something that is a gem, I certainly like to let everybody know about it. And everyone that knows me knows that when I find something I like to let everybody know about it. So
I appreciate that. And if anybody would like to get my resilience assessment booklet, which goes into my model and gives a 40-item questionnaire that people can self-score, and get their personal resilience profile. if they email me, sideroff@ucla.edu, I will send it to, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. So sideroff@ucla.edu, I will send it to you free.
That's wonderful. And what we'll do is when when people are actually watching this, for those of you that are watching it right now, you'll see that, scrolling at the bottom there so they can have easy access to you and everything you're doing. So on that note, thank you so much for coming on the program today. I learned so much. The benefit of having somebody like yourself is I feel like I've had a personal session myself. So I feel extremely relaxed. I'm happy. I had my session in for today, so that's good. I'm all good. So I'm good to go for the next couple of months personally, and then I can just refer to your book for any other questions or issues that I have personally. And we look forward to welcoming you back on the show at some point in the future to talk about how the book is going and your book tour and all that stuff. So for all the viewers and listeners, thank you for watching another episode of Wellness at the Speed of Light. I hope you've been able to watch this entire episode with Dr. Sideroff, which has been really a tour de force on resilience and how we can get on the path. And if we fall off the path, we can get back on the path by just referring back to the book and just taking some actionable steps in that direction. But until next time, thanks for watching another episode of the show.